Good evening. My name is Bill Dolby. I am the Associate Head of School at Lake Forest Academy. Our Head of School, John Strudwick, is sorry that he could not be here tonight. He's meeting with parents and alumni and prospective students in Japan, Korea, or China. I'm not sure which one he's in tonight, but he's on that trip. In John's place, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 12th Annual Rothstein Lecture. Thank you for being here tonight. And LFA students, thank you in advance for silencing your electronic devices and giving our speakers your undivided attention. The Joshua Aaron Rothstein Class of 2005 Memorial Lecture was established by Nancy and Steven Rothstein in memory of their son Josh, who was tragically killed during his sophomore year at Lake Forest Academy. By establishing the lecture, the Rothsteins honor Josh's memory, his kind deeds, his entrepreneurial accomplishments, and the depth of character that he demonstrated daily in his interactions with family, friends, and strangers. The Rothsteins also celebrate how Joshua lived his life, guided by ethics, dignified by sound character, dedicated to community service, and committed to living inclusively and inspiring others to do the same. For over a decade, the fund established by the Rothsteins has brought a wide range of speakers to Lake Forest Academy and has, in honor of Josh, had a lasting impact on the LFA community. Now, to introduce tonight's speaker, I invite Josh's mother, Nancy Rothstein, to the podium.
I stand here tonight as a mother devoted to perpetuating the legacy of my son, Joshua Aaron Rothstein, who until October 7, 2002, walked the halls of Lake Forest Academy as you do today. This lecture series was established to celebrate Josh, including his commitment to living inclusively and teaching others to do the same. It's so apropos to the message of this evening's esteemed guest. I stand here tonight honoring Josh on his birthday, April 16th. It would be his 28th, yet maybe it's more appropriate to call it his birth date, for today was the date on which he was born, and each April 16th, we honor his birth date, as his birthdays are no more. Yet I choose to celebrate his life every day. Josh was a remarkable individual who continues to speak his voice in a new voice, hearkening each of us to embrace the extraordinary gift of life while it's still ours. I stand here tonight acutely aware of how precious our days are and how important it is to make the most of your life with love at its core. I stand here tonight privileged to honor my son, a day, and two people who have given their hearts and their stories to so many. You may recall, students and faculty and staff, you may recall that this lecture was originally planned to be held in September, with Zipporah Katz, the Holocaust survivor, scheduled to be the Josh Memorial Lecturer. Sadly, she passed away the week before she was to speak. And today, for those of you who don't know, I surely didn't, is Yom HaShoah in Israel, a day of remembrance, to mourn the tragic loss of life, the genocide that occurred during World War II, which resulted in the death of approximately 6 million Jews, as well as the genocide of millions of others discriminated against for their social, cultural, and religious identities. As I read this morning, never forget does not solely imply remembrance, but also prevention. To remember the Holocaust is to foster the understanding and progress that will inhibit such genocide from occurring ever again. Tomorrow, many of these students, I think the whole sophomore class, will be going to the Holocaust Museum in Skokie. How fitting is it that we're here to hear from one who knew firsthand of these atrocities and who has dedicated himself to perpetuating his story and the prevention in the future. But before I continue, I ask that we take a moment of silence to honor those who perished and to honor those whose voices continue to speak to us with grace and care, including Sephora Katz and Joshua Aaron Rothstein. And so I stand here tonight in awe of the strength that a person can have in the midst of the utmost of challenges, even as a young child. I stand here tonight and bear witness to a man who has been able to lift himself above the frightening memories and pain, to inspire others to recognize that love, self-respect, gratitude, and valuing every person will annihilate the risk of another Holocaust. I stand here humbled to introduce to you a courageous man, one who embodies what I admire most, transforming adversity into helping and inspiring others to live fully from a place of love in both the heart and the mind. Aaron Elster is a child survivor of the Holocaust. He was born in 1933 in the small northeastern village of Sokolow in Poland. Aaron lived in the Sokolow Ghetto with his two sisters, mother and father, until the liquidation of the ghetto in September of 1942. He escaped the liquidation and hid in various surrounding farms. Eventually, Aaron found refuge in the attic, and I just saw pictures how someone could survive like that as a child. The attic of a Polish family. He hid there for 2 years until the war's end. After the war, he lived in several orphanages through Poland and eventually was smuggled out of Poland to various displaced people camps, otherwise known as DP camps, in West Germany. Aaron Elster and his sister came to the United States in June of 1947. He was educated in Chicago and served in the armed forces in Korea. He is married and has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. He is an active member of the community, serving as the co-chairman of the Speakers Bureau and vice president at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, and additionally he serves as chairman of the Speakers Bureau for the Hidden Children's Association. He is a co-author of I Still See Her Haunting Eyes, which chronicles his Holocaust experiences. Aaron continues to speak extensively on the local and state level about his experiences and the lessons of the Holocaust. It is my utmost honor, heartfelt honor, to introduce to you Aaron Elster.
With this kind of introduction, if I had any brains, I'd say thank you very much and go home. Where's my doping body? There it is. Gives me a stroke every week, and he beats me. Gives me a stroke on every hole, and he still beats me. Good evening. I'm totally overwhelmed and impressed by this facility and the kind people. There's an old saying that says that sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I'm here to tell you that that's a lie. Words, unkind, derogatory words, hurt much more than physical pain. Physical pain goes away. but words stay with you and sometimes determine the type of individual you're going to be. I speak from my own personal experience. It took many, many years for me to finally accept myself as a decent human being because of what I was referred to as a child, as a youngster. So I plead with you young people, and I come here, I place a burden on your shoulders. You should know that. To be careful how you use words against one another. To be the ones to make a difference. Because after all, if things are ever going to change and we're going to stop killing one another, it's in your hands and your hearts. So I plead with you to be the upstanders that you can be. To speak up. If you see a bully someplace calling somebody a name or isolating another student, say something. What a difference that could make in that student's life. To extend a hand of friendship. I also know one thing, and I tell you this because I truly and honestly believe this. Because of my own personal experience, I did this as a 10, 11-year-old, and standing here as an old man here. I can't believe it. But you have the same strengths within you. You can overcome all types of adversity if you believe, and achieve the dreams that you have about yourself if you believe. So now, where did it all start? I can't go back far enough. But when Hitler came to power, he was voted into office. He didn't take over Germany by force. And he was a very hateful and spiteful person. When he was in jail, he wrote a book saying what he was going to do to the Jewish people. And nobody believed him. So it was just another crazy, he was going to despair. But we've learned since then that if somebody threatens to kill you, you better believe it. So Hitler surrounded himself with life-hating people and wanted to create a nation, a regime, a government that would last for 1,000 years. And only certain people could belong. So in the process of creating this perfect Aryan nation, they murdered over 11 million people. 6 million were Jews. And only because they were Jews, 1.5 million were children, including something that's been breaking my heart for most of my life, my little 6-year-old sister, Sarah. But I ask you to think about something, because when we talk about 11 million, 6 million, 1.5 million, those are numbers. They lose their impetus, they lose their importance. It becomes a number. What I ask you, young people, is to think about one child. Whether it's a brother or a sister or a cousin or somebody that you love very dearly that would have been taken away from you. Then it's no more 1.5 million, it's one child. One somebody that's very dear to you dying 1.5 million times. And those pains never go away. You should also know that in Germany, Hitler as converts started killing their own people. If you had a disability, if you had a mental problem, you had no worth to the country. You were a burden. Why do we need you? So they used to pull these people out of hospitals and homes, shove them into trucks, reverse the exhaust pipes into the truck, and asphyxiate them. And then the general population got wind of that. So the killings went on the ground and didn't stop. And then if you were a Jehovah's Witness, if you were a gypsy, if you were a Jehovah's Witness and you didn't swear allegiance to Hitler, you were eliminated. his particular hate was for Jews. Now, my personal involvement with all this came in 1939 when the war broke out. I must have been 6 or 7. I really don't know exactly how old I am, so I keep going back and forth in 83 and 82 and 83. I don't know. German soldiers came into our town. First thing they did is to pull the chief rabbi out of his quarters, chased him up to the town's marketplace, sheared his beard off while their friends, their comrades, were taking pictures of this humiliated Jew. And they killed him. And then suddenly we were not citizens anymore. We had no rights. Most of our possessions of any value were taken away from us. And in their wisdom to protect us from the local population, they built a ghetto. They took a 4-block area in my town where perhaps 1,000 people would live, or used to live. And if you lived outside that area, the Gestapo would come to your house and tell you got 50 minutes to gather your belongings and move into the ghetto. 12-foot walls were built with barbed wire on top. So what happens? The rule was that each room that existed had to have 8 people in it. Doctors not allowed to practice medicine or no medications. We were placed on rations. We were supposed to survive on 486 grams of food, and I don't know how little that is to explain to you. I can only relate to this, that if you ever go to McDonald's and buy that little hamburger, that one hamburger, that's more than 486 grams of food. So what happens? 8 people to a room, no soaps. People begin to die. They die of hunger. They die of typhus. Because disease would break out. And I remember as a youngster walking the streets of the ghetto, seeing dead people lined up against walls of the building didn't affect me. But then seeing little children, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, with their eyes popped up in the same condition, dead and dying, and that brought it home to me, because I was convinced that I would be one of those. So that makes a tremendous impact on your life. And I didn't want to die. I had the audacity to try and survive and overcome what I did. I wanted to live very desperately. Where it came from, I don't know. Even now, life is very precious. Every day I get up, I'm grateful to the Lord. I remember as a kid, I used to pray to God to let me live till I was 25. Why 25? I wanted to know what it would be like to be an adult. And here I am. If my math is correct, over 3 times 25. And then you ask yourself, why me? What was so special about me that I survived? And for years I've struggled with that question because there's no answer to it. And I've come up with my own conclusion that I survived for a reason. So I can do what I've been doing. So I can impart what happened to people 70 years ago. And what is still happening all around the world. You know, when the Holocaust was over, we said never again. This was never going to happen to anybody anymore. Yes, again. The Hutus started killing the Tutsis in Rwanda. Close to 1 million Hutus were killed, Tutsis were killed in a 3-month period of time with machetes. Can you imagine that? Because they were not considered people anymore. They were considered bed bugs. And bed bugs had to be eliminated. The same applied to the Jews. They were not human beings. They were interdimensional subhumans, and they had to be rid of. So life in the ghetto kept changing from day to day. And the finality to us came in 1942. On a Jewish holiday called Yom Kippur, or Day of Atonement, the ghetto was surrounded by Gestapo, local police, and Ukrainian soldiers. I remember my mother waking me up early, telling me to get dressed in a hurry. We had a hiding place on the second floor of our building. Remember running up the stairs, men, women with children in their arms, all trying to get into a room that was the size of an average bedroom. And by the time it was over, there must have been 35 people there. And a man reached up, grabbed the ladder. We had to go down and put the cover on top of our hiding place in hopes that we would not be recognized, that we would not be found anymore. And I remember looking out the window of that room. It was painted green, but it had scratches on it. And you see the gendarmes, the Gestapo, running around searching for Jews, and the ones they found, they would beat them with rubber truncheons. Some were shot. Some were chased to the back of our house where there used to be a potato field. Men, women, and children were lined up and shot. Imagine this, if you would, a woman holding a child in her arms, gets shot, she falls into that hole that was dug. But the child is still alive. How can human beings do this to one another? But it was easy. We were not human. We were garbage. In the same room as we were yesterday, there's a woman sitting there feeding her child, breastfeeding her child, and suddenly the child begins to cry, and everybody tries to tell her, well, this woman, to keep the child quiet. So we're not discovered. But the noise continues. And if you can believe this, the mother places her hand on the child's face and begins to exert pressure until the child moves no more. And you look at that. And you wonder, would your mother do the same thing to you? Can you imagine a mother doing this to her own child? You can only imagine that if you understand the circumstances, if you are part of it. Because the will to live is so great in people they'll do anything to survive in most cases. And suddenly, the opening to our hiding place is ripped away. A demonic face appears and vanishes, and suddenly there's gunshots. And screams of rouse, rouse, out. And then suddenly blood on the floor with dead people all around me. And I'm sitting there and the blood running into my mouth from a bullet that hit the wall and a splinter is embedded in my upper lip. And I'm so scared, I wish I had the words to describe to you. I wish I had the ability to tell you how scared, what it means when you know you're going to die and it's going to be painful. I just don't possess that. And we're chased out of a hiding place. My poor dad has little Sarah in his arms, and I'm behind him. His back shields me from the blows of the Ukrainian guards as we're chased downstairs. One of the older women, a neighbor of ours, she can't keep up with us. The guard walks up to her, shoots her in the head, she crumbles to the ground, to the amusement of these girls. And there's the little kids. People crying, screaming, begging God. It was not to be. And we're chased up to the main gathering point in the town's marketplace, covered with cobblestones. I still see every cobblestone there. And if you've ever seen a movie with all the atrocities with dead people in contorted positions, laying around the cobblestones from previous groups that they brought in, and we're made to line up, to sit one line behind the other, and guards walking around us beating people, but they're not lined up exactly right, and I'm crying, and I'm pleading with God to spare us, to save us. But then I also wonder, why would He save me? And I'm sitting there and I'm crying. I want to live. And my dad says to me in Yiddish, "Läuf, Arla, läuf, run, Aaron, run." How am I going to escape? They'll see me and they'll shoot me. But I also know that I wanted to do that. I had to do that. I wanted to live. So I crawled behind the people sitting in lines on my stomach and my hands and my knees. I kept crawling till the end of the marketplace in hopes that I wouldn't be seen. And then slither into this muddy sewer that ran along the street and kept on crawling on my stomach till I felt I was out of sight, and I stood up and started running. My objective was to run out of the ghetto into the free zone. But on the way, I ran into a house that belonged to an uncle of mine, and went into the cellar, his wife, my aunt, and a little daughter were sitting there hiding. I spent that afternoon with them, and then when that evening came, I said, "We gotta get out of here. They're gonna come back, they'll do another search, they'll find us, and they'll kill us." And she was frozen with fear, wouldn't move. I crawled out of the cellar, went to the back door, where the kitchen was, and the barbed wire fence was from here to probably where the wall is over there. And I tried to make my way to the barbed wire fence, looking for guards to see if anybody's there. And in the process, I see there's a little old woman standing on the outside, Polish woman with a babushka and a skirt down to the ground. And when she saw me, she started screaming in Polish, "Chodź, come!" And I ran to the barbed wire fence. I lay down on my back. She lifted the thorny strands of wire, and I'm crawling through on my back. In the meantime, one of the thorns gets stuck in my legs, but you know what? You're bleeding profusely, but you don't feel anything. When you're scared like that, you don't feel any pain. And I made my way across. And the woman pats me on the shoulder and tells me to run. Where to? Unfortunately, most of our former neighbors weren't too friendly or kindly to us. But we had a lot of friends that were Polish because of our business. So I went to a restaurant that was owned by a woman called Mrs. Kuchevicova. Thought perhaps she would help me. I went into the kitchen. And one of the guys working in the kitchen, I asked whether I can see Miss Lady. And he came back and said she's too busy. She was feeding German soldiers and their girlfriend. And he handed me a loaf of black bread, a round loaf of bread. And he told me that he would help me if I wanted to, if I just hung around until he was through work on the outside. So I sat by the garbage dump, waiting for the time to pass by, in hopes that it would help me. But suddenly, because you're not a kid anymore, you don't think it's a 10-year-old anymore, you think it's a 25-year-old. Is this man really going to help me? Or is he going to turn me over to the Germans? And that's reality. Those things happen continuously because the Germans would offer a prize, so we were. So I picked myself and kept running into the fields and ran into the forest. I remember gathering up a bunch of leaves and branches to make a bed for myself and used that loaf of bread as a pillow and went to sleep. And within a short period of time, that bread disappeared. So hunger becomes my preoccupation. Where do you find food? I used to roam the field, especially in the dark, and I would find potatoes that were buried in the ground. I would cut them up in quarters to grow for next season. And I would dig those things up and eat those potatoes, and I must tell you, they don't taste well when they're raw like that. And then at night, I would roam the fields again, looking for a barn that had an open door or loose board so I could sneak into the barn, hide in the hay or the straw. Because the weather was changing, it was getting cold, I'm still wearing my short pants. And this continued for weeks. I don't know how the hell I survived all that. And then one day, I don't know how, I decided to walk to a work camp. A camp called Kurchev. They left about 1,000 people to use as labor. And when I got there, one of the people told me my mother was still alive. She was picked out of line, put on the work detail. Her job was to help clean up the ghetto, send all the belongings of the Germans, one up, and the rest was left open to the general population. And I found my mother. And she hid me in one of the buildings, and at night she would come and bring me whatever food she can find. This went on to probably late November, early December. And just before the Gestapo pulled up to their workstation to kill them because they didn't need them anymore, she and another man escaped. They came to get me and again into the fields, into the woods. And my mother would go and beg and plead with our former neighbors, farmers, for a place to hide or some food. Those turned us away. Others threatened to turn us over to the Germans. And I'm getting sick. I remember one night, I'm standing near the farmer's house against that wall, the outside wall. And my mother negotiating with the farmer for a place to hide. And then suddenly she disappears with him. And when she reappears, she approaches me. And she tells me that I must go, that I must leave, that I should go back to the town to see if the Gorskys would take me in. She handed me her earrings and a ring that she had, and told me to give this to the Gorskys or anyone else would be willing to hide me or help me. But my heart is broken. I feel so abandoned. How can a mother do this to her own child? And what keeps you going is hate. Hate takes over. You hate everything and everybody around you, including your mother. And somehow you have the will to tell yourself, okay, I'll survive. Back to the woods. But you're smart enough now to know that you can't fall asleep in the woods anymore because it's covered with ice and snow. You know you're going to die, you're going to freeze to death. So again, traipsing through fields that are covered with snow 3 feet high, looking for a barn, for a place to hide. I remember one night taking a chance, knocking on the farmer's door and pleading for his kind mercy. The man takes me down to the cellar of his house, and his young daughter, perhaps 13, 14 years old, brings me some hot cooked milk with potatoes in it. My life has totally changed. The elation that overtook me, the hope that maybe they will keep me, maybe they'll hide me, maybe they'll even make me part of their family. I tell you this, that milk and potatoes, 70 years ago, is still in my mouth. The slightest thing that resembles that brings me right back to that cellar so many years ago. There are certain things in your life that become totally gray. Certain things that are so outstanding as though they happened yesterday. And then a couple hours later, I'm called up from the cellar, and the man tells me he's afraid of his life. He's afraid if the Germans find out he's helping a Jew, they'll kill him. not only him, they'll kill his wife, his children, and they'll burn his house down. And my friends, that's reality. Germans didn't have much respect or thinking of the Poles. They were to become slaves. They had one notch above the Jews. Over 3 million Poles were murdered. But you know what he told me that stays with me if I live to be 1,000? He tells me to give myself up because there is no longer any future for people like me. But I wanted to live. I wouldn't even dream or think about it. I left that place and started walking back to the town. And if I had the ability, the pain to describe to you, the freezing cold, you can't feel your hands, you can't feel your feet. And every time you take a step, your foot gets stuck in the snow. And you take another step and the other foot gets stuck. And you continue. There are certain things that come out of you that you don't even know you possess. And I did this. In spite of all the pain and the freezing cold, I made my way back to the town. I walked into the ghetto. It was totally dark and silent. There were no Jews. There was nobody left. Walked into one of the houses, lay down on the floor, and went to sleep. And next morning early, in hopes that no one would see me or recognize me, I started walking to the Gursky's. When I get to the Gursky's, I knock on the door. She sees me. She starts screaming at me for coming there. I told her my mother told me you would help me. You're my last hope of trying to stay alive. You have my sister in your house. Your sister's not here anymore. You must leave. And I begged. Oh, I begged and I cried. Because your life depends on it. And somehow I reached her and she says, okay, I'll let you up to the attic, but only for a few days. And then you must leave because you are not my responsibility. You must leave and find your mother again. I handed her the jewelry that I had. She hands me a bucket to use as a toilet. She stuffs some straw into a sack and we crawl up to her attic. Is that a picture of the attic here? I can't see it too well, but I think that's the attic. Somebody asked me tonight whether there was a bed up there. No bed, no mattress. Sack of straw was infested with lice. And once a day, Mrs. Gursky would come in, bring me some soup and a piece of bread, take my bucket out, and leave. And I was left alone. Nobody to speak to. Didn't talk to me. Didn't like me. Because I posed a threat to them. And that attic became my safe haven. I must tell you that winters were extremely painful in that attic. As you can imagine, you're right under the roof with your sack of straw. It's cold and it's dark up there. So winters were extremely miserable. You had no blanket. I used to hate to tell you this, but I used to pee on myself to keep warm because it felt good. And then that stuff would freeze. And the hunger. Daydreaming of the time when food was taken for granted. Sometimes kids tell me, yes, I missed a meal, I'm hungry. I says, you don't know what the hell hunger is. Hunger is when the insides of your stomach keep turning and you would sell your soul for a piece of bread. And somehow you survived. You survived because of your will. I learned not too many years ago from a gentleman by the name of Primo Levi who wrote a book. Spent a year in Auschwitz talking about people who died and people who survived in the same torturous and painful, degrading circumstances. The ones that died, they just gave it up. The pain was too severe. While others that survived gave their body to the pain, but kept their mind, their soul away from it. And that's what makes you survive. Did I understand that or know what that means? Of course not. But apparently I must have had some of that. The will to live was absolutely unbelievable in my thinking. So winter was bad, and then spring would come. And your hope of better times. Hope that maybe somebody in your family survived, that you would see your mother, your dad, and especially my baby sister, Sarah. But then spring would disappear and the summer would come. And it's nice and pleasant. But it gets to be 90, 95 degrees. And that attic, that roof, is made out of tin plates. And it gets so hot you can cook on it. The air from the attic is totally sucked out. You can't breathe. You lay there, totally still, soaked in sweat with the slightest movement. The rats, the mice would roam at will, couldn't care less about my attic maze, convinced that their chance of survival was greater than mine. So what does a kid do in an attic? Dark, filthy, cold, hot. What do you do with yourself? You're probably 11 of them. Maybe 1 or 12. I don't know. I used to sit there for hours trying to delouse myself. But you can't do it. The more lice you kill, the more appear. In the 2 years that I was there, if you can believe this, never took a bath. Never brushed my teeth, cut my hair, changed my clothes. I had no clothes to change. And you know the irony of all this? In the 2 years that I was in this totally filthy place, such horrible conditions, I never got sick. Today, the wind blows in the wrong direction, I catch a cold and I'm home. There's something about us as individuals. We can overcome if we believe. And that's my appeal to you people up there. And Mr. Gruski never talked to me, he hated me. And I gave him reason to do that. But sometimes they don't say this to people. The floor was made out of dirt. And to entertain myself, I would walk around, draw designs on the floor. I used to pee on it. I thought I was an artiste. But unfortunately, Mr. Gursky comes walking down the stairs on the way to church. And my artwork drips down on his head. And he came and he reminded me of all my ancestors that ever existed. And what a terrible, rotten person that I was, how ungrateful I was. And I gave him plenty of reason to do that. He had an apple tree. Each morning he would have an apple and a piece of rye bread and his tea or whatever, and then go to church. And fall came, he picked the apples and he's got to hide them someplace. Guess where he decided to hide them? In the attic. He would put down a layer of straw, put one apple next to the other, very tight. And I'm sitting there, have nothing to do with my life, so I have to figure out a way to get to the apples. I would take an apple off and rearrange them all. He couldn't tell the difference. And as I continued to do that, the spaces between the apples became a little more visible, and again, he came to see me. You know, I tell you this, in spite of all the horrible things that I went through in that attic with those people, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't pray for their souls. And I tell you this, my mother gave me birth, but this woman gave me life. I would not be here if it wasn't for her. There's no way I could have survived any longer. So am I grateful. So by the time it was all over, out of the 6,000 Jews that lived in my town, only 29 people survived. Only 2 children survived on the film. My sister Irene and I. My poor dad dies in the gas chambers of Treblinka. My mother survives in hiding, and 3 months before we're liberated, Mrs. Gursky comes crawling into the attic to tell me they just brought your mother in. I found out later she was hiding in a farmer's barn that we knew. He caught her there. Instead of letting her go, he called his field hands. They wrestled her to the ground, they tied her up, put her in a wagon, brought her into town, turned her over to the Gestapo, and she shot the town cemetery. And according to Mrs. Gursky, my mother was pregnant. 3 months before we were liberated. And my poor little sister, Sarah, not knowing exactly how she died, I've created this terrible image of her death. Don't know whether it's so, but this is what's in my mind. This is what I see. My little sister being pushed into a cattle car that's overcrowded with frightened people of all ages, destined to that infamous death camp called Treblinka. By the way, Treblinka existed for less than 2 years. During that period of time, they murdered over 600 and some odd thousand men, women, and children. There was no work there. And you got there. Gas into the ovens. Some of the victims died from being trampled on the standing room only transport of death. And then you ask yourself, who was there to hold her, to assure her that all will be well? Or being alone as a 6-year-old among strangers, possibly pushed to the ground and stepped on as so many others were. Unintentionally. And assuming she survived that trip, chased into a large sorting room with other women and children, where their clothes were taken away from them and all their bodily hair shorn from their heads and their bodies, on the pretense of being deloused and taking a shower, and then chased into another room with shower heads. But instead of water, poison gas was poured down on them in order to choke and kill them. The choking gas would cause the stronger and the bigger to climb on top of the weaker and the smaller in order to reach out for any air that still existed at the ceiling level. And in that struggle, the smaller, the weaker, are destined to the bottom of the heap. That struggle causes them to lose control of all their bodily functions, and they die in agony. And in 70 years, I carry this with me forever. I've accepted the death of my parents, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents. But Sarah's pain lives with me forever. That's a good portion of my story. I don't know what time it is. I forgot my watch. But I'd be delighted to answer any questions. And by the way, if you're interested in my story, somebody has a book. That's the commercial coming in. I was very fortunate to put some of my thoughts into a book that you can probably read in less than 2 hours. It'd be available to you if you give your name. And I'll bring them here, I'll sign them, and we'll do whatever's necessary. So anyway, questions? And I need help because I can't hear too well, so. It's going to be a short session if you don't have any questions.
What happened after the war?
I'm sorry.
What happened after the war?
Who said that?
What happened after?
Okay, I got it. What happened after the war? You know, before the war ended, the Russians bombed the town. And a bomb fell by the house and ripped the roof off. This is a new roof that we just saw. So we had no roof. We had no attic anymore. Mrs. Grutsky had a chicken coop. She put us both in the chicken coop. We stayed there for close to 7 days. And by the time some survivors showed up so she can turn us over to them, neither one of us could walk. I weighed about 50 pounds and my sister maybe a couple more. And then what happened? No family, no home. You're destined to go and beg a meal from all the surviving disjointed families. And it's degrading. So you're smart. You become a street kid. You certainly learn how to survive. And then I got lucky. An uncle of mine showed up. My Uncle Sam. He was in the underground. Came back with the Polish army with a submachine gun on his chest, and I thought he was 12 foot tall. He's been my hero all my life. And unfortunately, our neighbors were not too friendly to us. Some survivors were killed by the locals because they were afraid we're coming back to repossess our properties. So we left in a hurry. We went to another big city called Łódź. And I was placed in an orphanage, which to me was a great place. Clean beds, 3 meals a day. What the hell else can you ask for? And then my uncle in his wisdom decided we were going to leave Poland. So he bribed the Russian soldier to take us to the Polish-Czech border, smuggle across to Czechoslovakia, and our destination, our ultimate destination, was West Germany. Why Germany? Because Germany was divided into 4 zones. The Russians, the English, the French, and the Americans. And everybody wanted to get to the American zone. So we got on a train. No money, no passports. MPs come on the train, we're gone. We did it again. They come on the train this way, we jump off the other way. Run like hell, wound up in Germany ultimately. Displaced persons camps. 4 of them. Lived in Germany for close to 2 years. And I was a pretty smart guy. Made friends with the American GIs. They used to give me candy bars and cigarettes and things that I'd be able to sell on the black market to add money so we can have food. But you know, they did something for me. They took it upon themselves to teach me how to swear. I tell you this, I can compete with the best of you. Ultimately, I was brought to the United States with a full vocabulary of every cuss word you can think of, and some that you probably can. Didn't know how to speak English, knew how to say okay. And I wound up in Chicago in a place called Mark Snapen Home, an orphanage. And in their wisdom, the public school system puts me in the 6th grade. And I'm already 13, I think. What else are they going to do with me? I can't speak English, and swearing doesn't do you much good. So they kept me there, I don't know, for 4 or 5 weeks. They pushed me into 7th grade, then they pushed me into 8th grade, and then they graduated me at the end of the year. And very conscious of my accent. Kids make fun of you. And I went to high school. And I wanted to be one of the boys, so desperately. Never talked about my background. Didn't want to be a victim or known to be a victim. And if some of you are old enough, you may know that we used to put a ½ a pound of grease in our hair with peg pens. And I have a picture of that. I wanted to be the Fonz. And somehow I slept through high school, and as soon as I did, I got a letter from Uncle Sam. They couldn't get along without me, so they drafted my rear end into the Army, sent me to Fort Leonard in Missouri for 12 weeks of basic training. And to my pleasure, I'm sent to Korea. It's not a very nice place, especially in those days. It's 1954, they just stopped shooting. And I got married before I left. The same young lady I've been going out for 4 years. In fact, it's been 62 years we're still together. I don't know how we manage, but we are. You're applauding because I'm married? Anyway. I came to this country, I was so overwhelmed by the goodness and the abundance that existed here. Food. Food, all you can possibly want. I lived in a foster home. I used to steal food from the lady. Why? She caught me, she gave me hell. Why the hell are you stealing food? Do I stop you from eating anything you want? But it's habits that are hard to get rid of. And the nightmares. For years, those nightmares stay with you. Somebody's always chasing you and trying to kill you. And somehow you smarten up in your nightmares. You know you're not going to die. And you have such low esteem of yourself. You don't think you're ever going to succeed in life. And you make certain decisions. Because as a youngster, I was full of hate. As a teenager, my ambition was to steal an airplane and bomb Germany off the face of the earth. That's what I wanted to do, and I would have done it gladly. And I hated it. But then I made a decision. If I continue to hate, I'm ruining my own life. And I wanted to have a normal life. I had a wife, I had children. I had to stop hating. And I did. And now I don't hate anybody. But if you were to ask me, can you forgive? And the answer is hell no. I can't forgive. They want forgiveness. They have to go to my poor little sister. They were 6 years of age. And ask her for forgiveness, not me. It's not within me to do so. So you change. You evolve. You do it out of necessity to protect yourself. And then, probably shouldn't bring it up, I had a problem with God. I was brought up to believe that God was all. How could I have allowed this to happen? Children, innocent children, to be murdered. How? Why? Is there a God? Or was there a God? And you struggle with that. And every time I had a problem, I'd pray to God. Even though I was terribly upset with him or her. So I've made many decisions and many changes in my life, and I tell myself now, you'll find out pretty soon. Is that a question?
one right after.
Yes.
Can you tell us what your eventual profession became?
My profession. My profession was a salesman since I was 7 years of age. If I could sell Mrs. Gursky to let me up to her attic, I could sell anything. I wound up in the insurance business, investments, insurance, always selling. I still am. Trying to sell these young people to become the best they possibly can, to be upstanders, to make a difference. Yes, sir.
What made you decide to speak about your experiences?
I didn't speak about them until maybe 27 years ago. I made a fatal mistake. In the Army, they tell you never to volunteer for anything. And I happened to walk into a place on Main Street called the Holocaust Museum. And there was a lady sitting at a desk, Mrs. Granton, says, "Oh, would you be kind to please go downstairs? There's 125 kids there and the speaker didn't show up." That was the fatal mistake. I did it once and I've been doing it for 20-some years. And it used to be very, very difficult for me to do so because I used to break down all the time. But I do it because, as I said to you before, there had to be a reason for me living, for my survival. And I've come to believe that the Lord has saved me to do what I'm doing. Hope that answers your question.
Do you have any thoughts or opinions about the current situation with the Iranians threatening Israel as a country?
You think you were going to get me into it? Not a chance. I have my feelings about that subject. You want to talk to him privately.
So, do you find it really hard to believe anybody after everything you go through, all those years?
Could you help me?
Is it hard to believe in people after what you've gone through?
No, I'm a patsy for people. I love people. And I believe in people until they hurt me once. But you have to do that. To protect yourself, you have to try to be as normal as you possibly can. And believing and associating with people is part of it. And I love people. So what happened to me, did it form who I am? Perhaps so. I hope not. I hope what my parents instilled in me when I was that high, carried me forward.
What's your handicap?
Ask Rick Lindstone. I went out today. 96, terrible. You'll have to give me 2 strokes of hole from home. And he beats me for $2. Can you imagine that? Please be kind to one another. That's the best thing you can do. So thank you very much. Have a great life.
Well, such a great gift to the school. And as a very small token of our appreciation, I'd like to give a gift to the Illinois Holocaust Museum. For anyone who would like a copy of Mr. Elston's book, Sheila Moeller is down here, and through just touch base with Sheila, and she can give you her email address, or Elevate students will know that email address, and she can arrange to make that happen.
And I'll bring them and I'll sign them.